As adventure travelers, four-wheel drivers, we rely on maps to go traveling and find our way to new routes, exploring new places and enjoying our time in the wilderness. And all of us have one thing in common. We have to rely on somebody else who's been there before. My name is St Pierre White. Join me as I build four-wheel trucks and travel to the remotest parts of the world. I'm a prisoner of this hill. Of course, I'm talking about maps. We have to rely on somebody else's navigation skills for us to find our way and not get lost and get ourselves into trouble, run out of fuel, and of course find the places that we've set out to find. Now, I've been along both sides of this road. I started a mapping company, and as far as I remember, it was probably in about 1999, 98, 99. I wanted to visit a place called the Richtersveld in 93, and sorry. Wild area in South Africa, it's the only desert mountains in South Africa, far northwest of the country, very remote. And there were a few articles written about it in some magazines, and I decided I had to go. And of course, when we went, we had no good maps. We arrived so it's a national park called the Richtersveld National Park. We arrived, they gave us a handwritten map of the park and the roads within the park. It was very inaccurate, but it was enough for us to make our way around. But in terms of researching, it was hopeless. There was nothing. Of course, then the internet wasn't big at all. It was just in its early stages of development. And I thought, I needed to make a map. Because the Richtersveld was one of those places that's going to become incredibly popular. I needed to make a map. Now, at the time, I was sponsored, both financially and with tires, by a company called Continental Tires. And in South Africa at the time, they were very big. It was a very big tire brand. And the chap I dealt with, somebody by the name of Wayne Asher, it's funny how you remember some names, sat down at his desk and said, I want to start a mapping company and I want to call them ContiMaps. And he thought it was a lovely idea. And I said, we want to do this first map of the Richtersveld. If it's successful, would you be interested in actually creating a brand with us? And he said, yes, I definitely would. And I remember they gave us quite a bit of money, and it was pretty generous at the time. It was enough for us to do the map and get it out there and do the research and do it properly. And so that's what we did. We created a map called the Richtersveld by ContiMap. And there it is there. That is a JPEG. It is created, it was on the back of the map. It is created by a series of aerial photographs taken by aircraft. And I remember going to the mapping offices in Cape Town. They were extremely helpful, and they loaned me photographs that were actually out of date. But nothing changes there, it says mountains. But what made this map different? You see, that's the other side. Now, this was based on a topographical map. And there it is there. Now, I based the drawing on topographical, using color shades for height elevation. But I believe, and I'm not sure if this is correct, I believe that ContiMap was the first mapping company in the world to actually print GPS reference point on the map. So literally they would be written out and used for reference. So you could drive and then look at your GPS, because at that time a GPS did not have a map. Certainly not the kind of GPSs we were using in vehicles. There were no map plotters or with GPSs with any map of any description in four-wheel drive vehicles. But you could verify your latitude and longitude. So then you could stop at a particular intersection or something, look at the map and say, yes, I'm there, and get verification of one's location. That today is still for sale. The brand now is called InfoMap. Probably 3 years after this map was published, Conti stopped supporting the map, mainly because it's the old story. You have a relationship with somebody at a company that's sponsoring you and supporting your work, and that person, Bill Asher, left and he went to live in England with his family. And so then the person that came over, they'd so often want a fresh sweep. They just kind of sweep clean, and they kind of pushed us out and said no more. But that didn't really matter, because we had a good brand, a good product, and we had started a company. Now the next map was of Namibia, but this one we had to finance ourselves. And of course Namibia is a very, very large country, and we did it in 3 different parts, and the same rules applied in terms of gathering information. But what happened researching Namibia is particularly interesting. So that there is the Namibia map that we created, and there's northern Namibia there. And I was actually told by somebody a motorbike who did a 6-week tour of Namibia, and he said to me he avoided all tar roads sticking to gravel, and there are a lot of them in Namibia. And he said he took 4 maps. He said after 1 week all of the other maps were put aside and he was just using ours. That was a great compliment. This all was before the days of Tracks for Africa. But what made the researching of Namibia interesting is something went wrong with the world's GPS system. And it happened while I was researching this particular map. Now the Kouka land is the far, far northern part of Namibia, and Bushman land is off to the east. Very remote areas, and this is the part of the Namibia map that I researched myself. And I took it in my Gelandewagen. I would painstakingly stop at different intersections and record it on paper and GPS waypoint and publish it in a map. And here is the map. There she is there. That is the Kouka land. About a year after this map was published, there was an outdoor show, Trade Expo, touting our maps. Now at this time I had 2 books, probably 3 videos, probably 4 maps. We had a thriving business. And the mapping part I loved. I've always loved maps. I've always loved drawing maps. I've loved, since I was a little boy, poring over maps. I just love that part about maps. So when drawing these and designing them, I could really just, what do I want out of a map, and pour it into these. A chap came up at the trade show and said, your GPS coordinates are wrong. Okay, which ones? Open the map. Now he opened the map, and there's a place in the Kouka belt called Rooidrom, or Red Drum. One of the best known landmarks of the Kouka land is a place called Rooidrom. And when I first heard about it, I thought, well, you've got to go to Rooidrom. Rooidrom is the place to go in the Kouka land. And I arrived to find a red drum. Rooidrom is Afrikaans for red drum, and this is the place that I was told that I had to visit. The GPS coordinates for Red Drum are written on the map, okay, and they match the coordinates written on a barrel. At Red Drum, the red drum itself, the red barrel, has a memorial to Jan Joubert, who was an explorer in the area, who died a couple of years before I researched this map. And they had a memorial to him with the GPS coordinates actually written on the drum, and my coordinates matched that. And they said my coordinates for Red Drum were wrong. I said, that's interesting. How many vehicles were in your convoy? There were several. He said, yes, and they were all reading it, and you were wrong. And there was nothing I could do to placate this guy. He was really angry and abusive, very, very abusive. And I was kind of flummoxed. How can it be wrong? It's written on the barrel. How can it be wrong? But they also said that others were wrong too. Others were wrong. How can others be wrong? So on further investigation, guess what? I found that others were wrong. But the one at Roy-Drum wasn't, even though they said it was. This is weird. This doesn't make any sense. And I was completely flummoxed by this. How can some be wrong and some be right when I know that the one that they said was wrong is definitely right? Really, really weird. And a day later at the same show, a chap came up and said he was a missionary pilot. And he said, your maps are really useful in the Keukenveld. I said, well, really? Why is that? And he said, well, what I do is I'll fly. He said, I've got 3 GPSs on board. And I will fly over and I said, he'll have the map. Now I should add here that the way this map is folded is unique. What I decided to do, I digress from the story a little bit. What I decided to do when developing my map business was to have the maps easily readable inside the confines of a vehicle. I can open this map and read it in the confines of a vehicle like a book. I don't have to open the whole thing to see it. I can do that and then fold it and navigate. Clever, hey? Okay, so this guy, this pilot, he said, your maps are very useful. How's that? He said, well, remote. You can see this Bushman land here. Hardly any roads. Okay, Keukenland is the same. There are hardly any roads. It's an incredibly remote area. So he would fly and he'd glance down at the intersection. He'd glance down at one of the little boxes where there's a coordinate, and he'd look at the first 4 digits of the coordinate. He'd glance up on his panel and he'd verify his location. That's the intersection. That's the intersection. He said to me, one day he was flying, he did the same, and he'd had my map in the cockpit for a long time, and he looked down, he said, all the numbers are wrong. All the numbers are wrong. He said to me, he was completely flummoxed because he knew where he was and he knew the numbers were right because he'd navigated to them before, and now they were wrong. So he carried on flying because he knew where he was. He was just verifying his location. And he said, something's gone strangely wrong in the Keukenveld. And he said, it's intermittent. It's not like that all the time. Sometimes GPSs are thrown off by a long way. And I said, well, how many kilometers do you reckon it's thrown off? He said, well, by the look of it, it's probably 30 to 40 kilometers out. And that was really fascinating because after I took a lot of these off the shelf, withdrew them and reprinted them, because we discovered about 6 or 7 coordinates just in Keukenland, the northern part of Namibia, not in Bushmanland, just that area, were incorrect. Because that anomaly, whatever it was, had happened while I was actually driving it and writing down those coordinates. It was giving me incorrect coordinates, wrong enough for it to be a problem navigating on the ground in a road environment 30 kilometers way out. You can be out by a kilometer and get away with it when you're in an area where there are very, very few roads, because there's only one road. So you can't, there's a bit of leeway there. A kilometer is a lot, I agree, but there is leeway. It's not going to threaten your navigation. You're still going to be able to find your way. 30 kilometers? No. That's not acceptable. So we withdrew them all. And I went back and checked them all out, and we verified them all. And isn't that interesting? That's really, really weird. And while these people were very, very abusive towards me, I had to just, suck it up. But that wasn't the worst time that I was abused in terms of map data, because the thing is with map data, if you blindly rely on it and and this is why I say time and time and time again to people that are driving in remote locations, the GPS is your backup, not not, I could go into a rant so easily here. It's not, and it must never be your primary navigation. It's like flying in an airplane. You do not use a GPS as primary navigation. You use it as secondary navigation. Because so easily it can lead you the wrong way, because a GPS in many cases cannot tell the difference between a rocky track that your average speed is 20 kilometers an hour and a gravel road where your average speed is 90. It cannot often tell the difference, particularly Garmin's. And the reason why Garmin's are like this is because they have it's either a track, a road, or a highway. There's nothing in between. There are only 3 levels in the software infrastructure database system that whoever programmed it, and they haven't updated it. There are those 3 things. And it cannot tell the difference, so it'll send you down a road that will take you 9 hours to do 6 kilometers because it doesn't know any better. That's why it's so important not to use auto-routing and to have a paper map and to be able to know mentally where you are in the paper map. And that's why I love, for example, the HEMA maps in Australia. Your maps, guys, are beautiful. Man, they're beautiful maps. I look at my maps and just drool over your maps because the detail is fantastic. HEMA on an iPad is amazing. I love it. HEMA in their own GPS is lousy. I don't like it. I don't like it. Too restrictive. Don't like it. The cursor's the same color as the roads, and half the time the cursor vanishes and you have to try and get the cursor back and that kind of thing. But on an iPad, it's fantastic. Tracks for Africa, your maps on an iPad, guys, you've missed the boat completely. You missed it. It's terrible. It's really horrible. And really you've missed the boat because your maps are fantastic. You could make them work on an iPad like the HEMA works on the iPad. Okay, so that's my little bit of a rant about, because I love maps and I love using maps. But again, using a paper map is preferable to using a GPS. And if you had to say to me, I'm going to give you a paper map or I'm going to give you a GPS, I'm not going to give you both for your trip. Take the paper map without blinking. Half of my recent trip in Africa and Zimbabwe, I turned the GPS off. It was misleading me. It was getting things wrong. But I was going to tell you about the abusive behavior. I was at a trade show. Might have even been the same one. I don't remember. But the Namibia map was a big seller. We sold a lot of most maps. I mean, several thousand a year. And it was now my personal fault that this man had his Land Rover shot at. And there was a bullet hole, and he showed me a photograph. There was a bullet hole in the back door. And I said, oh, you know, what happened? Your fault, Mr. White, your fault. You should have printed in your map that there was a convoy necessary in the Caprivi. You didn't, you are responsible for repairing my Land Rover because it's disgusting. I had to put up with this. And he just went on and on and on. And there was a short window where there was some terrorist activity on the river, on the border between Angola and Namibia. And they were running convoys along the Caprivi for a window to protect people. And of course it wasn't written in the map because he had got an old edition, or I don't remember, but that was my fault. So my mapping business grew to about 30 different titles. We did a whole lot of maps in South Africa. And what became difficult was I would go out and decide, okay, I'm going to now make a TV show, for example, like the one I did in Transkei. And I would research my map at the same time as shooting for a TV series. It was enormously demanding, and it was almost frustrating in a way because I could either do one well or the other well. Trying to do both well would slow progress so much that it just became too difficult to do both. So eventually I would say, is this a mapping trip or is this a filming trip? It can't actually be both and be effective. I loved my time with my mapping business. During the heyday of my mapping business, I created some of these. They're called 6-packs. 6 adventure travel maps. Southern Africa series, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Mozambique, Swaziland, and Zambia. And these were an enormous success. Man, we sold a lot of these. And I would call them InfoMap high detail maps. And they did have a lot of detail because they were all researched by somebody getting in a car and driving and making notes. But Tracks for Africa's lead on us was because they had such a huge database and they were using GIS systems, highly professional digital mapping systems, and they were starting now to do auto routing in their GPSs, and they had a product that we could not possibly compete with. We didn't have the resources. Today, InfoMap competes with Tracks for Africa. And if I had to use a map for planning a long trip, I actually prefer the InfoMap. But the detail within the Tracks for Africa makes them better to have. And if I had to choose one or the other in driving in Southern Africa, I think I would probably take a Tracks for Africa map over an InfoMap. But I still think they're really great maps. My time with my mapping, well, I will always look back at it with great fondness. Tomorrow, a full TV episode. This has never been shown on YouTube before. I visited the wild coasts of Southern Africa to research a map and shoot a TV show. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support my work on Patreon.